Hello, this is Dr. Grande. Today's question is, can I analyze the case of Andy Dick? Just a reminder, I'm not diagnosing anybody in this video, only speculating about what could be happening in a situation like this. If you enjoyed this video, please like it, subscribe to my channel, and consider supporting me on Patreon. I will put the link to Patreon in the description for this video. First, I'll look at the background of Andy Dick, move to the timeline of crimes and other controversies, then offer my analysis. Andrew Tomlinson was born in Charleston, South Carolina on December 21, 1965. A man named Alan Dick and his wife Sue adopted Andrew at birth and named him Andrew Rowan Dick. He went by the name Andy. Some people have last names that signify an occupation, like farmer, gardener, weaver, or hunter. Based on how Andy would behave later on, there is this sense that perhaps he thought his last name was supposed to be his career. Growing up, Andy lived in a number of places, including Connecticut, Pennsylvania, New York, Yugoslavia, Georgia, and Illinois. In 1984, he graduated from a high school near Chicago. In 1985, Andy joined the improvisational comedy troupe Second City, although that's not something that Second City advertises at this point. A number of famous comedians and comedic actors started their career at Second City. Andy spent the next several years performing stand-up comedy in Chicago. He moved to Los Angeles in 1988 with the hopes of being a successful comedian and actor. He landed his first television role on the short-lived sketch comedy show, The Ben Stiller Show. This was in 1992. In 1994, he was featured on one episode of the CBS show The Nanny and had several other small parts on TV shows. He was on the show Get Smart in 1995. It ran for only 7 episodes. Andy's big break came this same year when he was cast as the character Matthew Brock on the NBC sitcom News Radio. This show also featured talented actors, including Maura Tierney, Dave Foley, and Phil Hartman. By far, Phil Hartman was the most talented comedic actor on that show. Joe Rogan was also on the show. He's not a great actor, but he did an okay job in that role. Andy Dick also had his own TV show on MTV from 2001 to 2003 called The Andy Dick Show. He was on the ABC sitcom Less Than Perfect from 2002 to 2006. He also had small parts in a few movies, including The Cable Guy, Inspector Gadget, and Zoolander. Now moving to the timeline of Andy's crimes and other controversies. On May 15, 1999, Andy Dick was charged with a number of offenses after driving his car into a utility pole in Hollywood, California. The offenses included DUI, hit-and-run driving, and possession of cocaine, cannabis, and drug paraphernalia. He eventually pleaded guilty to cocaine possession, cannabis possession, and possession of a smoking device. After completing a drug diversion program, the court dismissed the charges against him. On December 4, 2004, Andy was arrested for indecent exposure at a McDonald's. Specifically, he exposed his buttocks, probably not the type of buns the patrons were looking for. At a 2005 Comedy Central roast, Andy grabbed Pamela Anderson and tried to grab Courtney Love. Courtney actually slapped Andy across the face. In 2007, Andy was a guest on the television show Jimmy Kimmel Live when he repeatedly touched Ivanka Trump, who was also a guest. On July 16, 2008, Andy was arrested in connection with drug possession and pulling down the shirt of a girl outside of a Buffalo Wild Wings. Later, he pleaded guilty to marijuana possession and misdemeanor battery. Andy was sentenced to 3 years of probation. On January 23, 2010, Andy was at a bar in Huntington, West Virginia at about 4 a.m. He was arrested in connection with making inappropriate contact with 2 people. Later, he was offered a diversion program, and the charges were dismissed. In January 2011, Andy was thrown out of an adult movie award ceremony for inappropriate contact. In April 2011, when Andy was at a party, he urinated on a backdrop before destroying it. In 2017, Andy was fired from 2 different movies for making inappropriate contact with production members. In March of 2018, Andy was the target of a restraining order by a former love interest and their 2 children. He was not allowed to come within 100 yards of them. His love interest implied that Andy had trouble with his alcohol intake. In April of 2018, Andy allegedly made inappropriate contact with 2 different people in 2 separate incidents: a woman who was passing by him on a Los Angeles street and the driver of an Uber. He was charged in connection with both incidents. On June 26, 2021, Andy was arrested for felony assault with a deadly weapon after allegedly using a metal chair to attack a lover. He was released on bail the next day. In November of 2021, Andy was arrested for domestic battery after allegedly hitting his boyfriend with a bottle of liquor. In April of 2022, Andy was beaten in Las Vegas, Nevada, and sustained severe injuries to his face. On May 10, 2022, Andy was arrested for a charge related to inappropriate contact, but this charge was later dropped. In October 2022, Andy was arrested for first-degree residential burglary after allegedly stealing power tools from the garage of a vacant home in Santa Barbara, California. It's not clear what Andy thought he was going to do with the equipment. Power tools are typically handled by people who work for a living. Andy was sentenced to 90 days in jail in November of 2022 for prior charges. He was ordered to receive mental health counseling. At the time making this video, Andy still has a number of pending cases. It seems likely that jail could be in his future, but who knows? Andy has done a pretty good job of escaping consequences in the past. Now moving to my analysis. Here are my thoughts in a few areas that stood out to me in this case. Item number 1. In the early days of Andy Dick's career, he demonstrated a mild level of talent, although it was clear that he was immature. Much of what made him valuable in comedy was his willingness to be impulsive and do just about anything. The problem is that these very characteristics are also associated with substance use. What made Andy valuable as a comedic actor also led him to trouble. His substance use prevented him from developing into a true comedic talent. The raw material may have been there. He was somewhat funny in the beginning, but the talent never had a chance to grow. It makes sense that some people looked at Andy and thought he could have had a future as a comedic actor. However, his own decisions destroyed his chances of success. It's almost like he was unable to turn off the impulsivity. It was constant and affected every domain of his life. On the TV series News Radio, Andy generated most of his laughs through physical comedy. This was the highlight of his career. Item number 2. Andy Dick may have been affected by the death of another Second City alumni. Andy was in Alcoholics Anonymous. His sponsor was Chris Farley, a comedic actor who found massive success on Saturday Night Live and a few movies. Unfortunately, Chris Farley used illegal substances excessively. On December 17, 1997, Chris Farley was coming to the end of a 4-day bender involving cocaine, heroin, and cannabis. Chris convinced a friend of his to hire a sex worker for him at a price of $2,000. Chris and his companion used cocaine and heroin in his apartment. At 3 a.m., now on December 18, 1997, Chris Farley collapsed on the floor as his companion was leaving. She did not call for help or render assistance. Rather, she took a picture of him. This really punctuates how truly isolated Chris Farley was at this point. Some believe that the tragic death of Chris Farley affected Andy. Chris was somebody he looked up to, and here Chris died of drug use. Which brings me to item number 3. Some people believe that Andy's reaction to Chris Farley's death may have indirectly led to another celebrity death. Around the same time that Chris Farley died, Andy Dick attended a Christmas party at the house of Phil Hartman, his News Radio co-star. Phil Hartman's wife, Bryn, was at the party. Bryn was trying to recover from substance use problems. According to the comedic actor Jon Lovitz, Andy supplied cocaine to Bryn. Phil Hartman and Bryn had many heated arguments prior to this about her substance use. Phil was thinking about leaving Bryn because of this behavior. Perhaps her cocaine use that evening caused more arguments. About 5 months after the Christmas party, on May 28, 1998, Brynn was high on cocaine when she murdered Phil Hartman by shooting him 3 times with a .38 caliber revolver. John Lovitz and some other people blamed Andy Dick for reintroducing Brynn to cocaine, believing that she would not have murdered her husband otherwise. I think it's unlikely that Andy Dick actually facilitated Phil Hartman's death in any way. Brynn had a long history of substance use problems. She made a number of poor decisions without help from anyone else. Regardless, this connection to Phil Hartman's demise did not help Andy's already troubled reputation. Item number 4. Andy has made excuses for his many unwanted advances, which include physical contact. Some have argued that the word unwanted may not be necessary, considering any advance by Andy would automatically be considered unwanted. It's like saying an irritating Meghan Markle podcast. The word irritating is just implied. Ironically, Andy has defended his touching behavior by saying that he's out of touch. He suggested that the modern social climate is different and confusing to him. He's not even sure what the appropriate behavior is these days. People are overly sensitive about his many boundary violations. If people want to reject his advances, all they have to do is tell him no. Here we see that Andy is unwilling to accept responsibility for his behavior. He knows full well what he's doing is wrong, but he's trying to make excuses for it and blame the victims. Andy appears to be unwilling to stop touching people. He's so prolific, he should be nominated for the Joe Biden Hansy Award. Item number 5. On occasion, Andy Dick has pretended to accept responsibility, but he never seems to be sincere. He once suggested whatever comes his way in terms of public humiliation, he brought on himself. He said, "I will never overturn people's negative expectations of me in my whole lifetime." I think that last statement is probably correct. If anything, Andy always finds a way to make his reputation worse. He doesn't know the meaning of rock bottom. Every time he hits what appears to be rock bottom, he somehow finds a way to dig further into the ground. Perhaps that is why he needed all those power tools. Now moving to my final thoughts. When somebody's job is to be a little bit unpredictable, it can be difficult for them to separate that from personal activities. Fame, money, and impulsivity don't really go that well together. Andy Dick probably never should have been famous, but once he somehow achieved fame, no one wanted to hold him accountable. He had money, power, and status. This bought him about a dozen second chances. Andy was able to continue getting one break after the other, but he never learned his lesson. His attempts to defend his behavior demonstrate a lack of insight. Unlike many people who have substance use problems, Andy has significant resources available to assist him. By 2015, he had been to rehab about 13 times. In addition, his substance use has been addressed many times due to his arrests. Other celebrities who have suffered with substance use problems, like Chris Farley, have gained empathy from the public. Andy, however, has alienated pretty much everyone. He does not appear to be willing to change. He doesn't look like somebody desperately seeking help, but rather somebody desperately making excuses. Those are my thoughts in the case of Andy Dick. Please put any opinions and thoughts in the comment section. They always generate an interesting dialogue. As always, I hope you found my analysis of this topic to be informative. Thanks for watching.